Jesus prays for our oneness. Jesus prays that we would be not only connected to one another, but to God. And so he keeps making these connections of showing how the work that Jesus has done has connected us to God, has connected us to each other, and he is that connecting link. And we have been talking about what the church is over these last number of weeks in our teaching series called Life Together. We've been talking about how we live together as the church and going through Dietrich Bonhoeffer's book called Life Together. So now I have a question for all of you. I'm going to put it on the screen here. How is church different from other groups you belong to? So I want you to think about this. How is church, this Christian community, different from any other group that you could belong to? I want you to think about this. Do any of you actually have any answers? And are you brave enough to share them? How is church different than any other group you belong to? Everybody's like, please don't look at me. Don't look at me. I don't want to talk. I don't want to talk.
Jesus.
See, that was the low-hanging fruit right there, Jesus. And I would say that is exactly right. But we can bring Jesus with us into any other group we participate in as well. I mean, if you play on a sports team, if you're in a theater group, if you're in a crafting group, any old group of your friends, you can bring Jesus into those relationships too. There's something unique about the church, about this community. And I don't think you're going to get it. So I'm just going to tell you the answer. The one requirement that we have to be a part of this group is that you just have to be a sinner. That's it. You just have to be a sinner. That we should put that requirement, we should change our mission statement. Sinners required. Like, hey sinners, welcome to worship. Maybe we'll greet you that way every week when we gather. Hey sinners, good to have you here. That is our one common uniting factor about this church. Because if we weren't sinners, we wouldn't need Jesus, and we wouldn't need this community called the church. But sin is hard to talk about. We don't like to own up to the ways that we fall short. We don't like to acknowledge the horrible things we do to ourselves and the horrible things we do to each other. Sin is not easy to talk about, especially not in the culture that we live in. We have a very litigious culture, and there's a place for that, but yet it makes people fearful to own up to ways that they have fallen short. And we also have this thing called the internet. You may have heard of it, where things that people have said or done at any point in their life can be brought up, and then people just love to heap on and publicly shame anyone for things they have done at any point in their life. So we have this destructive thing going on where we don't like to talk about sin, we don't like to admit our sin, and when people's sins are brought up, instead of just being held accountable, they are destroyed. So sin is hard for us to talk about. But that is our common uniting factor. Because we are sinful, we have Jesus, and we need to be able to acknowledge that as a church, not to tear each other down, but to bring that to Jesus. That's why we always do our confession and forgiveness. And when the church forgets that it has this very important role of being a place for sinners to gather, we can become a very shallow church. We can become a very hypocritical church. And this isn't a new thing. Dietrich Bonhoeffer even talks about this in his book, Life Together. And he has this quote. He says, "Many Christians are unthinkably horrified when a real sinner is suddenly discovered among the righteous. So we remain alone in our sin, living in lies and hypocrisy. The fact is that we are sinners." And then further on, he says, "You are a sinner, a great, desperate sinner. Now come as the sinner you are to God who loves you." So yes, we do acknowledge that we are sinners, but we aren't left there. We are sinners who are brought together by the love and the forgiveness of our God. So it's something that we need to acknowledge. Because sin, it likes to keep us separate from one another. It likes to keep us isolated. Sin likes to bury us in shame, and all of those things hinder actual true community. When we come together as the church and do what God has called us to do, we bring all of our most horrible, humiliating sins to the light of day. We bring them to our God, and God greets us with compassion, with forgiveness. And when we're able to have God's light shine on our sins, we are able to have that fresh start. We're able to have that opportunity to build a true, genuine, deep community with one another. So we have to acknowledge it. We are sinful. Dietrich Bonhoeffer then says, once we've acknowledged that this is who we are and we bring ourselves to our God, and we know that we will be met with love and compassion, then the true work of building a community can happen. And he gives us 7 tools for how we can relate to one another and build this community, true, deep Christian community. And this is something that I teach the confirmation students and pre-confirmation students every year. And sometimes I call it the 7 disciplines rather than the 7 ministries as he labels them in this book. And that's because doing these ministries is a discipline. So are there any 6th graders in our midst tonight, since they're my people that I work on each and every week? Okay, I'm going to have you help me out through the sermon, okay? Because you're going to have to help show everybody how you're supposed to remember the 7 disciplines or 7 ministries, but then I also want you to help show everybody the actions. Yes, there are actions. Because when we have a word and an action paired together, we can remember it. Oh, but I'm also remembering, I want to share something that Jesus said in the next slide. Just so that this is where Dietrich Bonhoeffer gets this. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Jesus said it himself. So, all of us sinners have these tools at our disposal. And so the first ministry tool that Dietrich Bonhoeffer gives us, 6th graders, do you remember the first one? Yeah, hold your tongue. Now I want everybody to do it. If you don't really want to hold your tongue, at least pretend you're holding your tongue. I need to see everybody doing this. This is our first ministry together. Holding our tongues. So I think I've got a slide that says, the ministry of holding one's tongue. Think of all of the things that you have said or that could come out of your mouth that are hurtful and harmful to other people. It is a discipline to learn how to hold your tongue and not say those things. We don't often realize how damaging our words can be to one another. Think of the things that people have said to you that you have carried with you forever. They don't even realize that they've said it. They didn't realize how hurtful it was, but they didn't hold their tongue, and it's something you're still carrying. And you've probably said things to other people that you didn't realize that they are still carrying with them. So that is our first discipline. So now that we realize we're all sinners, we also can say, you know what? We also have to practice this discipline, this ministry of holding our tongues. Okay, the second discipline. Do you know what it is? Being meek. Yes, that is the second one. Everybody do the gesture, meekness. The ministry of meekness. I love seeing it. I wish I had my phone. Then I could take a picture of you guys doing that. Meekness often gets confused with weakness. It is not the same thing. Meekness is restrained strength. We hold ourselves back to lift others up. And that's a powerful thing. That is not a weak thing to do. When we acknowledge that we are all sinners and all in need of God's forgiveness, we then don't compare ourselves and say, well, my sins aren't as bad as that person. Anytime we start doing that, our ministry of meekness falls apart. But when we acknowledge we're all in the same sin boat together, we can hold one another up. The ministry of meekness. Okay, I need somebody else to pick on Jeffrey, what do you know number 3? What's the third discipline? Listening. He's got it. Everybody put your hand up to your ear. Okay, this is a gift that we can all give to one another. All you have to do is just not say anything. How amazing is that? That is a true gift, to truly be listened to. My husband is a counselor, and he talks about in the field of counseling, so much mental health healing can take place just through talk therapy. When someone is truly listened to, not judged, not condemned, truly listened to. I think counseling is such a powerful thing because you get to have someone who is just going to truly listen to you. And I recommend people to see counselors if they are working on something very hard that they just need to talk through. But we can give each other that listening therapy each and every day. We can put down our phones and we can just truly listen to one another. And that is a gift that we can give to one another. Okay, the fourth ministry or discipline. I need another 6th grader to help me out here. Do you remember the 4th one? It's not my favorite one. The 5th one is my favorite one. Do you remember the 4th one? Helpfulness. Okay, everybody just pat someone on the back next to you. The ministry of helpfulness. That's the 4th one in our toolbox. Okay, and I always have to clarify, especially for 6th grade boys, you don't slap each other's backs as hard as you can to cause pain. No, like we're doing, see, look at, they need to be reminded again. Helpfulness, the ministry of helpfulness. This is what Dietrich Bonhoeffer says. We must be ready to allow ourselves to be interrupted by God. God will be constantly crossing our paths and canceling our plans by sending us people with claims and petitions. Do any of your plans ever get interrupted throughout your days? Do people cross your paths demanding things when you're on the way to do something else? What if you reframed that thought and realized, this is God. God is showing up right in my life and is offering me an opportunity to be helpful to someone else. I think of all the Facebook posts that could be reframed that start out as, you'll never guess what happened to me today, hashtag a case of the Mondays, hashtag only my life, you know. What if we were to reframe all of the things that interrupt us, knowing that we have so many important things to do, but yet if we are being thwarted in some way, what if we looked at it as an opportunity to be helpful? Because maybe the person who's thwarting us isn't trying to wreck our day. What if they are being sent by God? Or what if they need to be ministered to and they need us to be helpful? So that's our 4th tool in our toolbox. Okay, let's do some review. What was the first one? Anybody remember our first tool? Holding your tongue. Okay, the second one, being meek. The third one, you can do the actions if you remember. Listening. Okay, I like this. And what's the 4th one we just did? Okay, so I really want you to remember these 7. And if you forget, they're on the back of your bulletin too. Okay, so the 5th one is my favorite one. You got to do the action. Yeah, rawr, the ministry of bearing. Rawr. See, I find this helps me remember. I pretend I'm a bear. But this is how Dietrich Bonhoeffer looks at it. We must suffer and endure the brother. It is only when he is a burden that another person is really a brother and not merely an object to be manipulated. So what he's saying is that when someone is a burden to us, that's actually when we get to know them, when they become someone significant to us, when they can become a brother or a sister to us, and they're an individual and not just an object. Be a burden. I like to say to our 6th graders, we are all annoying in our own special way. Each and every one of us is annoying at various times, and as adults, I don't think we ever grow out of it. But we all are on that spectrum from being annoying to being downright a burden. But we can look at the burdens and the annoyances in our lives as an opportunity to minister to someone. I think people's worst fear is to be a burden. But when you yourself are a burden, you are offering someone an opportunity to be a minister. Think about it that way. Okay, number 6. What is the 6th discipline? What was that? Proclaim Christ. And so everybody make a cross. We're not thwarting off vampires. We're making the cross in this case. We're proclaiming Christ. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says it's hard to actually proclaim Christ if you're not doing the other disciplines. He says proclaiming Christ means that you actually witness to how Christ is moving and working and active in your life. And it's saying the right word to the person who needs to hear it. So if you're truly listening to someone, you may hear their hurts and their pain and the things that they're longing for, and you will then, based on what you've heard from them, be able to listen to them enough to share a word of how Christ has met you in those moments of your own life. And you will then truly be able to proclaim. And he says, if you are truly being helpful to people, then when you proclaim Christ to them, your words are matching your actions and you are not seen as a hypocrite. So we can proclaim through our words, but if our words are not tied to the things we're actually doing, it is hypocritical. What's the 7th ministry? Do you have your hand up there? It's pointing up. Okay, everybody point up. The ministry of authority. That's the 7th ministry. Because we need to all remember that all authority comes from God and ultimately belongs to God. It helps us remember our place, that we are all in the same sin boat together. We are all dependent on one another. And yet God has given us this great mission in life to minister to one another, to share God's love with one another. So I am so thankful that I get to be connected to a whole bunch of sinners like you. I'm so thankful that I get to share life and be made one with all of you horrible, desperate sinners. That makes me happy because I know that God doesn't leave us there. God doesn't leave us in this sin boat with no hope. God gives us forgiveness. God gives us hope. God gives us salvation. God gives us new life. And that's where we land. So thank you for being on this journey with me. Amen.